How's it going, everybody? This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. Hope you're doing well and happy almost Christmas. By the time you're seeing this, I think we're about a couple days away from Christmas. So hopefully you've all had a really wonderful Advent. It's been pretty good over here, and I'm really excited because Christmas, fun fact, is like my favorite time of the year. I always thought summer would do it, but actually Christmas is great because it's with family and friends, and it's peacoat and jacket weather, and the songs are all great. And of course, what's a better time of year than to celebrate the incarnation of the Lord? And the fact that we're actually approaching almost 2,000 years since our Lord came to earth is pretty wild. So again, hope you guys have been having a very, very special Advent, and here as we prepare for Christmas. I have a really, really funny recent thing, and I've been thinking about it for a while. So as many of you know, I wasn't born in what you may say the traditional Catholic Church, right? I grew up much like you, probably in the Novus Ordo. All of my sacraments were in the new Mass. I was an altar server of the new Mass. I don't know how to serve the old Mass. So it's relatively recent in my life. By that, I say in my early 20s when I started to attend the traditional Latin Mass pretty much full time. And from there, I've actually started kind of branching on from kind of the big T traditions like the Latin Mass into the smaller T's. And something very recent happened, which I thought was an interesting thing, which is this was the first year that I really wanted to give a full-throated participation for the Ember Days. And for a lot of trads, even the Ember Days seems to like kind of a strange thing that gets brought up from time to time and nobody knows what they are. And so I'm going to tell you how I started and ultimately how I failed at the Ember Days. But I think it kind of points to a funny place where we find ourselves when we start to kind of go deeper into traditional Catholicism, and maybe why they should be revived. But you might have heard of the Ember Days recently because Dr. Peter Kwasniewski was on with Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas, and he talks about the beauty of the Ember Days. Up until then, I'd heard of them in traditional circles I'm in, but I'd never really thought of them. So before we get kind of to the story, I just wanted to read from my Angelus Press Missal what the Ember Days are. So this is what it says, since Advent is, of course, the reset of the liturgical year. The Ember fasts that happen in Advent are technically the first of four that happen throughout the year. This is what it says. At the beginning of the 4 seasons of the ecclesiastical year, the Ember Days have been instituted by the Church to thank God for blessings obtained during the past year and to implore further graces for the new season. Their importance in the Church was formerly very great. They are fixed on the Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. After the first Sunday of Lent for spring, after Pentecost Sunday for summer, after the Feast of Exaltation of the Cross, September 14th for autumn, and after the third Sunday of Advent for winter. They are intended to consecrate to God the various seasons in nature and prepare by penance those who are about to be ordained. Ordinations generally take place on Ember Days. The faithful ought to pray on these days for good priests. The Ember Days were, until 1960 or thereabouts, fast days of obligation. So now in the current church, the only days of fasting, there's only 2 mandated fasting days for Catholics, and that would be Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And then every Friday during Lent is a day that we are to abstain from meat, as well as on Ash Wednesday. Something else that's interesting is that in the traditional circles, well, I should actually back up. Technically speaking, you still should do a Friday penance. That's still on the book for Catholics. Traditionally, that was to abstain from meat on every Friday during the liturgical year. Now you can abstain from meat still, or you can substitute that traditional abstention with another kind of penance. But it still is on the book, so you should do that. And I actually heard that from a Novus Ordo priest in my hometown parish back around Thanksgiving break. So it's kind of cool that you can kind of see again the traditional water stirring, even as the new Mass is concerned. But like I said, I had never really done the Ember Days before. I had only heard of them really only a couple years ago. And I was like, okay, so this year I really want to do it. I really want to try, get another hole punch in my trad card. So here we go. So Ember Wednesday comes around here for Advent, and it was good, right? Day of abstaining from meat and also day of fasting, no problem. Ember Thursday rolled around, and Ember Thursday, if I remember correctly, Ember Thursday, you could have meat, but you still should fast. And that's when things started to go off the rails. I had an event later that night, and that did not happen in terms of abstaining. Maybe it was the other way around. Yeah, no, that's right. You still should abstain from meat. And then Saturday came around, and that was actually a huge Christmas party for my job. So needless to say, like one Ember Day down, The other two pretty trash canned. Not terribly proud. And people are like, aha, we knew it, Jordan. He's a fake trad. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I'm recognizing that, for a lot of people who discover tradition, oftentimes the Latin Mass is the first thing that they see and the first thing they fall in love with. So I think about all those years ago for myself. I had discovered the Latin Mass. I had fallen head over heels. It helped reinvigorate my faith. And it was from that wellspring that I started to understand kind of the apparatus of other traditional practices that Catholics used to do. As the Missal says, the Ember Days, fasting on Ember Days fell out of fashion by the 1960s. So when my parents were born, which would have been the early and the mid 60s, there were no Ember Days. Who knows how long before that they had fallen already into decay, and the reasoning, the beauty behind them had also been lost. So for a lot of trads, oftentimes the first thing they might encounter is abstention from meat on Fridays. So when I was going to Latin Mass, for a while I was going to Latin Mass, and then after that, the practice followed that I would start abstaining from meat on Fridays because growing up, my family didn't do this. Fun fact though, my grandparents, who were born in the 30s, they still did that even throughout the reforms of the Second Vatican Council and when a lot of these practices kind of fell by the wayside, right? Now I'm seeing this practice actually be revived, if you will, for a whole host of Catholics, not just traditional Catholics, but Catholics who attend the Novus Ordo as well. It's very common. In fact, I hear priests casually talking about how there should be an abstention of meat on Friday. This was completely unheard of, by the way, when I was growing up. And I'm sure that's the case for many of you. But maybe if you'd heard it growing up even, leave it down below. I'd love to always hear your stories, as you know. And when it came to the Ember Days, right, like I said, Ember Wednesday was great. And then Thursday and Saturday were a wash. Why is that? I usually think that these are not terribly difficult practices and there's a lot of beauty of them. And yes, I had events, but you would think, okay, with the kind of this regular Catholic apparatus, that shouldn't be a problem. And then it got me thinking about something else that Dr. K said in his Pints with Aquinas talk, which you should totally listen to. And it's very true. I've also read an article on 1 Peter 5 that was very interesting. And it talks about, the article is called In Defense of the Catholic Town. But the TLDR is that Catholicism is not a religion in which it thrives just in the wilderness by yourself. So while there's a lot of really great, beautiful things when it comes to homesteading or people wanting to live away from established society, Catholicism is fundamentally a community and a family religion. So oftentimes the practices of the faith as we think of them don't happen because we read them in a book, but oftentimes happen because they've been handed down very directly in our parish life as well as our family lives, right? You think of the beauty of the family rosary. We tried this growing up sporadically on and off, and probably more off than we did on. I find it such a beautiful tradition, just family prayer. That's something that I want to take into my own family. And part of that beauty, of course, is that the faith is not just something that we do on Sunday, but the faith is something that we live out. Here in the season of Advent, we have a great series on Formed that we just shot, edited, and released. It's called How to Advent. And you should definitely go check it out. But it talks about certain traditions that, again, growing up and even relatively recently, I didn't know about. The Jesse tree being one of them, where you actually get to see the sort of lineage of the faith going down and preparing us for the birth of our Lord. This was something that was completely unheard of in my family. The depth behind the Advent wreath. There was a tradition that we did as a family that I very much love, which is that we would put out the nativity set, but of course, we kept baby Jesus away from the manger until Christmas night when he is born. That's how the faith is kind of communicated. Yes, we get it from the church and the big C, like properly. Yes, we get it passed down because a priest tells us of these things from the pulpit. We get to experience it in part of parish life. But since Catholicism is a fundamentally very family religion, sometimes it's hard, I'm discovering, to do some of these to be recovered traditional practices apart from a sort of family setting. When I started going to traditional Latin Mass and I would come back to my young adult group at my Novus Ordo church, all really excited. Rudy tells this story, and I think it's true. People were like, "Oh, he's kind of becoming weird. Like he's becoming one of those like weird trad guys. Like what's going to happen?" Because I would come back to my friends and I would say excitedly about how there was confessions before Mass for the first time I'd ever seen on the regular. You don't have to just wait for Saturday or wait for an appointment. How you abstain from meat on Fridays. Coming back home when I started going to the TLM and my family didn't really do that, sometimes it could be a little bit difficult. And I learned about the beauty, of course, of substituting penances sometimes, but other times it was just kind of tricky. Like, how do you ask your mom to make you a good meal if your mom's set on making chicken that night and it's Friday. You're like, okay, well, I don't want to. And on the other side too, the purpose of these kind of smaller tea traditions, especially those that have no penalty of disobedience, shall we say, they're supposed to lead us closer to Christ. The Ember Days focus is to give thanks to God for all the blessings of the previous year, to implore his blessings on the current year, to let it be known that he is master of the seasons, and of course, to pray in particular for vocations to the priesthood, for good and holy priests. These are all really, really wonderful things. And yet it could be sometimes difficult to live out these traditions when you're like me, right? You're living kind of a more bachelor lifestyle and your immediate family is 1,200 miles away. And yes, they're very beautiful. I'm very blessed. There are very beautiful traditional communities near me. There's a lot of Catholics in this great apparatus. But Catholicism is so fundamentally a family religion that unless you kind of have a more hermit sort of state in mind, it can be kind of tricky, I think, to live out the faith in your home. Upstairs right now on my table, I have the Advent wreath and I have the candles placed around. And I'm going to go ahead and light the candles, especially since this is the fourth Sunday of Advent when I record. But still, I just think of other beautiful traditions I've heard in family settings. Families will sing Advent songs together. This might be a time where they'll put a little bit more straw in the manger, awaiting the baby Jesus. And again, these sort of traditions are very beautiful. They're very deep. They're very important. They're the things we're going to remember. But yeah, it's just sometimes it's tricky, admittedly, to live out that part of our lives when you are, well, I have a roommate, which is great, who's very Catholic. So that's nice. But, just kind of away from family. So yeah, the Ember Days did not go so hot this year, but I'm hoping, well, actually this year, that's a little too much because there's 3 other chances I get in this liturgical season, liturgical year rather. So I encourage you, especially kind of people who are new to traditional Catholicism, or maybe you still attend the new Mass or something like that, but you still are just understanding the beauty of some of these traditions that we've lost. I think it's very important that we rally around these beautiful traditions. I think it's very, very beautiful that we carry them on. We put them into our own interior lives and we put them into the lives of our family. And I also think it's important that we sit back, especially this time of year, and really do rejoice and give thanks to God for the gift of family and for the gift of how the faith is transmitted down. I'm extremely spoiled, friends. I am a cradle Catholic. So a lot of people who've kind of had to study, read, claw, and fight their way into the faith, a lot of those sort of adventures I just haven't had. I've never had to go to my parents and explain to them why I want to be a Catholic. I've never had to break off a relationship because I'm a Catholic. I've never had to change my job or a whole serious way of my life because now I'm Catholic. I've been spoon-fed since my infancy the truths of the faith. And every time I uncover a new tradition or want to implement something differently, it oftentimes is pretty harmonious with my family setting because there still is a pretty wide Catholic apparatus. It's not always perfect, obviously. Don't know if I'll ever get my full family over to midnight mass in the traditional Latin mass, but it'd be beautiful if it is. And if not, glory be to God that our home parish is, I think, much healthier and much more Catholic, like in terms of its practices, I feel like, than some ways it was growing up. But I just wanted to kind of say that, like, to sit back and recognize, the beauty of the faith that we have and how we arrive, especially deeper into these traditions. But again, let's not skip out on just how important it is that the faith happens in a familial setting. The importance of family prayer and eating together, the importance of talking about the faith outside of Sunday Mass, the importance of doing things like the Ember Days or other sorts of pilgrimages, right? Little pilgrimages. You don't have to go all the way to Rome, 20-minute pilgrimages, but setting time aside for the faith to be lived out beyond just the typical Sunday setting. That's really it. Your boy failed at the Ember Days this time, but he's going to be back on for the other 3 times this year. Hey, Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. It's been such a fun time here on the channel. I hope you've enjoyed a lot of the content I've been producing. 2026 is going to have a lot more adventures and a lot more fun, I'm sure. If you're new here or maybe you just haven't subscribed, please, please, please help out the channel and hit that subscribe button on YouTube. If you listen on the podcast sites, please go ahead and follow along the Glad Trad podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please check out all of those great reward tiers over at patreon.com/gladtradpodcast. And as always, I love to hear your stories and context. So if you guys want to share anything happy, sad, you want to write something down in the comment sections about maybe some of your discovery of tradition, you want just someone to listen to you, I'm here for you. So please go on and get in contact with me. Again, Merry Christmas to each of you and to your families. And I will see you all in the new year. God bless you. Merry keep you. Adios.